All right, it's 1 o'clock. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm in charge of documentation at Alpha Software, and I am joined today by Dion McCormick, Lead Solutions Engineer. We are here to give a short demo and answer any questions you may have about Alpha Anywhere today. So if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel now, and we will get to those right after Dion gives you a really cool demo of some stuff he wants to show you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dion.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's really appreciated. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, especially those folks in California joining us before the power's cut off. I don't know. I guess the winds are really high. It's really dry out there. So again, I hope everybody's safe and sound and it kind of just blows over with nothing going on out there. But thanks. And today what we're going to do is I want to do some follow-on presentations or demonstrations that were requested during our presentation last week. And it was just kind of things that we uncovered as we went through the process and didn't have all the facts myself. So we're going to go through that and show you how to enhance what we showed before and some other little tricks up our sleeve. But also we are here for your questions. So take the time to go to the Q&A section of your webinar control panel. Put in the questions there. Sarah will be monitoring them and we'll try to get to as many as possible. And we can also say you can always send to guides@alphasoftware.com. That's GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. Questions, requests, things like that. We always appreciate those. We have one this week we'll cover in a little bit later, but we always like those because we get them ahead of time. It allows us to really do justice to your questions. So with that, what I'm going to do is going to take a few moments here to kind of catch us up and also more importantly, dive into our demonstrations while you input your questions. So as we've talked about before, the most critical thing we can do is continue to enhance the user experience of your applications, making it easier for you to build compelling, powerful experiences for your users with Alpha Anywhere. So a key aspect that we continue to push on is the client-side UX builder, enhancing that. And we're actually covering some features that have been in there for a while, but we're going to transfer over and show you some new stuff next few weeks that I think you're really going to find are going to take you to the next level in terms of capabilities. Along with that, when we do work on the UX builder, a lot of sort of under the cover kind of work goes on in terms of how do we make things faster, how do we improve the usability, how do we make it more efficient on the server side to support these front-end pieces. And that's something that's sort of a symbiotic relationship. We are a company that eats our own dog food. It's an old school software saying is that we basically use Alpha Anywhere ourselves to develop our own systems, but beyond that also to develop other products. So for instance, Transform, which is highlighted down here on our roadmap, is actually an Alpha Anywhere application. The back end runs on Alpha Anywhere on the Alpha Cloud. The front end has been fully developed and deployed through the app stores using Alpha Anywhere. It actually uses both iOS and Android platforms and really, really handy. So through those experiences, and that's a critical aspect, not only are we taking input from our greater community, but we're taking our own input. When we're trying to implement very sophisticated capabilities with, say, Transform or other elements, or projects we're helping customers do, we drive that back into the Alpha Cloud, server-side capabilities, or Alpha Server, and most importantly, the client side, the development environment. And that is continuing very far ahead, meaning we have a lot of really cool capabilities are coming down the road that have really been driven by this process. And also as we find things, we fix them and improve the items that are within the system. So as part of that, one of the key things we keep focusing on is improving your user experiences. And we've been focusing on something called a Kanban. And we talked about that extensively. We're going to have one other demonstration today, which is in the Kanban, which is basically a fancy list control. You can use templating to create footers and headers and things like that to enhance the value of the Kanban display. And we're going to go ahead and show you, we've kind of showed you, color coding, the drag and drop move capability, but notice down here you have a footer capability that allows you to present sort of a summary of data that's in that one aspect. So we're going to show you a little bit more about that. That came from a question last week. But we also want to take another step. I kind of went down this road and then failed miserably, so we always like to come back and actually do it right. But the case was, well, this is kind of overkill. I just have a list of items that I'd like to, say, reorder, do a sort order or reprioritization kind of elements. And this is kind of overkill, meaning I really don't need to have multiple columns and stuff like that. Well, what's really neat is Alpha has built into it the ability for the list control to allow you to do a user-centric drag and drop effort to reorient or reorder things in a list. And we're going to cover that today. It's really fun. It's really easy to implement and really powerful because it will tap into some of the skills you've been developing on the Kanban and other elements there. So with that in mind, I'm going to dive into that, and then I'm going to come back and talk about the totaling, or what we call the footer header templating that is built into the Kanban control. And we'd like to say thank you for those questions, and please take the time to go to your GoToWebinar control panel and ask any questions. So let me go ahead and dive into this here. So I'm going to switch over into my development environment, and I'm using a new technique to show that. Let's see, is it showing just a window? Let's see, trying that. I'm not seeing anything in my preview. I might have to switch back to the old method here. If you could just check and making sure, I don't see anything coming through on my side. Are you seeing anything come through on your side?
No, your screen's white.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to go back and egats. I'm gonna stop screen sharing. There we go.
Yep, we can see it.
There you go. I had to do something to change it. So anyway, good for there. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go in here. We're going to create a UX control. And the goal of that UX control is I'm going to keep it very simple. It's kind of a blank UX control. And as I've done before, I like to put a panel card in there to kind of make it look nice. It's always the basis of any application here. And in here, we're going to go ahead and add a list control. So it's similar to the Kanban, is that, you know, we're going to use a list control to display data. We'll go list, reorder. And I'm going to set that up here, and I'm going to make that so it fills the container. So we'll go ahead and save this as list reorder underscore UX. In case anything happens, we have our save here. So I'm going to go into my list here. And I'm first going to go ahead and connect it to the data. And as a list, I could pull this directly out of a database, but to make this simple, and because I want to be able to provide everybody with this, I'm going to go into the static data and select our standard static data. So it basically just embeds some data directly into my list control. And as you can see, we have a set of fields here: first name, last name, city, and state. And since this is more oriented, well, I'll just go ahead and go to my list layout, and I'm going to go ahead and lay these out here, and I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to save this. And let's go ahead and show the preview here of what it looks like. And you know what? Let's pull one of our more modern styles. Let's just go ahead and use Alpha Blue. It's a little nicer style, and it will look good on the mobile device kind of scenario. Okay, so we have a list here. We're using right off the bat a grid. We're going to show you a couple other things in a minute, but to show you how easy it is to implement this system, I wanted to start simple and build on top of that. So as you can see, I have the click event. I can select items here. I could set this up for a multiple select, but currently there's no kind of click and drag activity on reordering these elements here. So I'd like to add that feature into the tool. So I'm going to go into design. And similar to the Kanban, I'm going to go into list reorder, and then I'm going to go to the field properties, and I'm going to scroll down. Now, if you want to, you can always click this properties little menu here and say, for instance, reorder, and notice it will find that and take me right to that setting. So it's down here. And so we have something called the row drag reorder method. So there it is, and I'm just going to go ahead and click OK, save that, and show you this. So now we've enabled that feature. So the list is now enabled. Now it looks the same, but watch what happens. When I click and drag, oh, I actually have to go in and set something in here. Sorry. That shows me, go here to my list, reorder, and reorder settings. Okay, so I'm going to use the down hold, and I'm going to, and there's two modes. I'm going to come back and talk about that in a moment. And then I'm going to come back and talk about the onMove JavaScript, and then drag HTML. This is where we have those pieces here. So let's go ahead and click OK. Working preview. It should have that. I'm sorry, I just did this. So let me go back in here. Okay, the trick is here. I click and I start dragging, and it's just doing like a select thing. I have to click and hold for a second so that it recognizes that I've selected. It's a click or tap hold behavior. And you know, this works right off the gate. If you can see this, I drag it, I can click an item here, and then you'll notice the blue goes away, and I can go up and down, etc. And it works, and it reorders that. Now, the important thing to realize is there's no visual indicator that this actually happens. So we'll talk about that in a moment with a different mode, which is actually probably a more appropriate mode for what you want to do. But as you can see, it's already built into that. So I click, hold it down until it goes off, and then I can click and drag, hold, then it comes back on there. Now, with that built into it, similar to our Kanban, is that I have what's called the onMoveEnd JavaScript, which means that what will happen is when after the move is done, it fires this JavaScript. And I showed last week how with the Kanban, once that's fired, I could take that data and either do a client-side event, or I could do something more fancy like a server-side event. So this is very similar to that. So I'm gonna go ahead and open that up. And as you can see, this is fairly simple. Basically what will happen is that it will give you a pointer to the list object. It'll give you the from and the to. So I'm going to go in here and let's just go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and just put in alert to. So what we're going to do is depending on where it is dragged to. So notice it's the zero-based row number for the target position for the road. And so I'm just going to do alert with that too. And let's go ahead and close this and save that and demonstrate it. So this is going to set me up here. I'm going to go ahead and click here, drag it up here, and watch what's going to happen on the screen. That you'll notice it dragged it to the first position, which is 1. And actually, let's go ahead and drag that all the way up here to the first position, and you'll know it's 0. So again, JavaScript is zero-based, meaning everything starts at 0, not the number 1. So you got to keep that in mind. The ordering of these items would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So I can actually find out where I've dragged it to. And if I want to, I can go back into my list properties, go into my onClick event or onMoveEnd again, and I'll say 2 plus, and I should do this correctly. And I'm just going to put a little more data here. So I'm going to go comma space from, and then the from word. So I'm just building up a little string to kind of show you where things are coming to and from. They've already given me the information on how to do that. So I'll click OK. And I will go ahead and save that, do a working preview. Now I have a little more information. And so this gives me sort of an indicator of which row. So let's grab Cecilia here, and I'm going to drag that up. So I'm click and drag that up to here. And you'll notice it's going from to position number 1 from position number 5. So that's handy if you're like re-ranking people and doing stuff like that. But we can actually get a little more information. It's kind of like, well, great, I kind of know what number is, but let's make it simpler. So I'm going to actually steal some code I put together already here. And I'm going to go into my here. I'm going to cheat because I wanted to make sure it's done correctly. And I'm going to go ahead and grab this right here and copy it. Okay, so I'll go back to mine here and go back into my list, go to my list properties, go down here to the drag reorder on move, and I'm going to paste that here. And I'll walk you through what this is doing right here. So as I mentioned, what happens is when this fires, alpha gives you some information. It gives you the from and to, which is what I've shown there. I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. Don't need that right now. But it also gives me a pointer to the object. And the pointer to the object is not the row, but the list object. And that's very important. It gives me a pointer to the list. So it fires it off and says, here's the list object. So now what I can do is with that information, I have two critical things. I have the list object and I have the row at which it is to, where it's dragged to. And so what I can do now is using a built-in function called getData, I can say grab the data from the to row, where it is when it ends, and give me my information. So I'm going to know two things there. I'm going to know the location in the list, and I'm also going to know which row that has been selected, but that's given by the zero-based item. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that data and I'm going to use the JSON stringify to convert it into text that I can throw up on the screen, just to show you I can grab that information. So again, I'm given a pointer to the list control. I'm given the to, which is where it's passed from. I'm also given the from, so I can go ahead and click here and do this. So I'll show you what happens here. So now it runs. And I can grab Nancy here and I'll click and drag that up to the second one. And you'll notice now that it's giving me the data about Nancy because I said, give me the row, the end row, which happens to be row number 1 from there. And you'll notice it gives me first name, last name, city, state, etc. So it gives me all the data I need to identify what row was dragged and where it was dragged to. And the benefit of that is twofold. One is that I could immediately work on it on the client side if I wanted to give the person a message. But more importantly is what I did last week is I did the following. Oops, oh, I pasted it in twice. That's why this is so confusing. I was like, why is I got all this stuff here? There we go. Must have pasted in there. So what I can do now is much like I did last week, I can then take this data, take the new row number, and pass it to a job or an action, a callback action JavaScript. So now I can take all this information about what happened on the front end and send it to a callback. And then on that callback, I know the data, then I could go back to the database. So for instance, let's say I'm doing the following. Let's say I have a database and I want to sort it a certain way. So the usual way you do that is that you have like a hidden column with the sort order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So when this is sorted, you don't have to do it by first name or last name or city. You have a specific sort order. Like maybe it's the ranking of these individuals or the order in which you want them to be dispatched information. So when I click and drag, what I want to do is when I drag here, what I want to do in the system is I want to call back to the database and redo those order. So when I let go of here, I can take this information, I can take the new position, so position number 1, and call like an Xbasic function that will then rewrite the sort order in this table to then sort it a proper way. And so the most important thing is first I can get that information from the client side event. And then if you go back and watch last week's on the move function on the Kanban, what it will do is it will show you how you can write your own little Xbasic callback to call back a function. I go through that in detail there. But it's very similar. I'm basically just getting the to and the data, putting it into some Java or into a JSON string, passing it to the Ajax callback and go from there. So that's the power of this is now you can have a very simple way to show a user a way to sort things or reorder things and then take action on there. Now, there's a problem with this, as I've mentioned, is that it works, but there's no visual indicator here that this system is going to work, meaning there's no visual indicator that there's a drag. I mean, I guess I could put a text up here saying click and hold down, or on a mobile phone, tap and hold down to trigger the item here. And there's some other visual things I can do to add there. It's a lot of different things that are available, but you can see it from there. So with that, I want to actually show a little indicator, and it's a little bit more complicated, but we're going to walk you through and show you how to do that. So I'm going to go back into the Kanban, or I'm sorry, into the list control, and you'll notice my current mode is down hold. but I have a different one here called handle. So I'm going to convert it to handle. Now, when I convert it to handle, I have to do a few more steps. I have to add a visual indicator, and I have to enable and toggle the mode. And those are the two things we need to do on here. So I'm going to grab the sample code here because I want to show you through this step of what we need to do. So I'm going to click sample code, and it shows you a few other things you need to do. And first thing is we need to add some HTML markup to the actual list to show the little drag icon. Then we had to add some CSS for the HTML. And then here's some JavaScript to show and hide the drag. So versus like click and it's all set up, you kind of have to do a few steps, but they're very simple. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and so the thing I did is I went to mode handle, then I click sample code, and I'm going to copy that code to the clipboard. And I'm going to go ahead and open up my notepad here. And just to make things easy, I'm just going to go ahead and paste it on my notepad and right there. So I've just pasted this sample information here. Here's the HTML for the list template, the CSS, and the things here. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to leave that enabled. So the first thing I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to go ahead and right now we're in our list layout for grid, which is the simple one. And the issue is we can't really enable this unless we're using the free form. So the step number one is we need to go back to our list properties and go here to layout tables or layout type. And as we mentioned, we're using column. What I'm going to do is switch that to free form. And that's where you're using mainly on a like a mobile phone or things like that. So I'll go to my list layout here and I go ahead and just put in last name right here. So I can do a quick preview. Let's see if this preview is okay. And you can see it's very similar to what I had there. So it's presenting this list to me here. And in fact, I can go for last name, first name, and I have a lot of flexibility. I could even use my predefined templates here to make it very much so look for like a mobile device, but I'm going to leave that a be. I want to keep it simple for you right now. So again, first thing I did is I went to freeform, went to my list layout and added those items in here. Now, as it mentioned there, it said that we need to add this HTML into the list template. So I'm just going to copy this first portion, which is drag order handle. So I'm going to copy that. So again, we got this code out of the sample. So we're going to go there and I'm just going to go there and paste it. So basically what this is a pre-made little drag handle that's going to show in the list control. And it's got a pre-made stuff. So now the other important thing we need to do is we need to add our CSS to this. So we have our HTML, but you'll notice it's calling out some CSS that I need from this standpoint. So I'm going to go back into my here, and I'm going to grab these right here, and I'm going to grab that CSS, and I'm going to go into here. Where's my CSS? Wait a minute here.
If I can help you out, there's a
Yeah,
checkbox at the bottom.
there we
Optional
are.
tabs. There you go.
It cleans up because I remember it used to show all these things and it was a little confusing for people, all this stuff. So yeah, sorry. So after you've copied that CSS, enable this optional tab in the low left corner. This will open up our CSS tab and paste it there. Basically what this does is it includes some CSS in the list control. So when the list control is displayed, it can then properly display my information here. So you'll notice in my little div, I have a class here called drag reorder handle. And in my CSS, I have a class called drag reorder handle. And Alpha has already done the work to make it look really sharp from there. So that's step number one. So again, real quick, first thing we did is we went to the properties here, changed it from a downhold to handle, copied this code out, put it on a clipboard or put it on something that I could use. Then I went to the layout type and made it freeform, went to my layout that I created here, put in my values and put in here. Then I enabled my CSS and I pasted my CSS here. So that now sets up my list control. So A It knows how to present the list reorder icon, and it also has everything enabled. But we have one more key step. So we've got our list ready to go, but in our documentation, let me go ahead and go back to my documentation here. You'll see that there's some JavaScript that needs to be fired to tell the list to go into drag mode. So when it first shows up, it's not in drag mode, meaning it's just sitting there and it's like a regular mode where you can, swipe up and down and things like that. But we need to be able to move it into that mode. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to my panel header here. I'm going to go to my panel card and add a panel header because I want my buttons to be at the top of the screen. And again, I'm going to use buttons here, but you could use images. You could use a control bar. It really depends on how you want to set it up, but buttons easy. So I'm going to add, and I'm going to go enable drag mode. And I'm going to add a second one here, and I'm going to say disable drag mode. And let's make it a little bit more. Let's go capsule raised, and I'm going to get rid of these so they're side by side. And I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to say capsule raised so everything looks good. Okay. So I haven't added the JavaScript, but I want you to see what this looks like now. So it looks pretty simple. I've got my buttons up here and got my items right here, but you'll notice there's no little indicator to drag. So it's kind of in the regular mode and these are static up there. So now I'm going to grab my little piece of JavaScript here from the JavaScript to show the drag handle in each row. So I basically copied these two lines of code. Now I go in here and I go to text mode and paste it. And basically what it does is it gets a pointer to my list control, which I have to adjust here, and then turns on the drag reorder. Now you'll notice when I pasted it, it says your list here, like your name here. Well, I have to actually put in my list. My list is called list reorder. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to hit a space bar, and you'll notice it highlights that black area here, and I'm going to say list order. So now it's going to get a proper pointer to here to trigger that activity. And since we're doing this, I might as well go ahead and grab my other JavaScript. This JavaScript is to hide it. I'll go into my other one, paste that. So I'm doing what we did there. And we'll go ahead and do list reorder. Okay. So basically it does a drag, it flips the mode as we go from there. So I'll go ahead and do a working preview. Notice we have cooler buttons now with the round. It's pretty neat. And if I change the color mode, no, it's got like round thing. So I'm going to enable the drag mode, and you'll notice that this now shows up. And it just very subtle and nice, and it works really well on a mobile phone because it's all smooth animation, real time, etc. So now that I'm in drag mode, you'll notice that it shows my little icon there. And you'll notice now on the mouse, if I drag over, it's got a little indicator that it's movable. So now I have a much more clear representation to the user of what they need to do. They're not going to get confused about what they should do, whether it's available. So now I'm going to click John Smith, and you'll see, and guess what? Everything else I've done so far works the same. So that onMoveEnd works exactly the same. We've just basically changed the interface of how it goes from there. Now, once you've done that, you disable drag mode. Now you're back into a scrolling by tapping. So it actually kind of puts you into mode saying, I'm going to go ahead and move these, because often you're showing a list and you want to say, okay, do you want to go ahead and reorient or resort these or reprioritize these items? It's a classic use case. And it works really well on a like a web browser because it's a mouse driven stuff. I can go through and do all my reorders here, etc. Or on if I'm using a mobile device, I can do that from the standpoint here. So very straightforward, easy. And so the trick is, again, as I mentioned before, built in, all the kind of core code is built into this thing to handle it for you. You don't have to do a lot of work just to, but if you want to add the indicators, you want to go to handle mode, you want to go to freeform, add in your new freeform. This is required because this is what shows that little drag icon. Add the CSS in here, and then last but not least, add your buttons to put yourself in mode. Now, notice that I put this button in here. Well, there's no reason for me to have it there. If, for instance, I have a UX control, I could take this information here Let me go ahead and just show you this right here. I'm going to go to the server-side events to the onDialog initialize. And I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go e.javascript is equal to, and paste it in there. Now what happens here, and this is a cool feature, is that when the onDialog initial runs, when this thing gets loaded up, it gets everything ready to go. And then once it's done, you can now emit your own JavaScript to do something, to give an alert, to make something happen, sort of like that. Everything's ready to go. So if this works correctly, when we go into here, you'll see that it sets everything up and it immediately puts it into drag mode. So I didn't have to click this. So if you have a UX where you always want them to be doing reorientation, it's not a mode, you just want to always show this to them, then you don't have to add a button. That's not required. You can use this trick to, on the dialog initialize, trigger this activity. And it could be triggered from other things like, you know, there's many, I mean, it's up to you. It's basically just firing off this JavaScript through a button or through a situation, or in this case, when the UX loads up. And I find that's kind of nice because often you're really just, you're not a mode oriented. You're just saying when the person's shown this UX, go ahead and just put them into reorder mode and start watching that list and do the reorder mode, etc. And again, as I mentioned, you can go ahead and change your in the actions, so you could add a Xbasic action to also put it into mode. I mean, there's many different ways you can handle this, but all you have to do is copy these two, make sure you change this to the name of the list that has the reorder function in it, because if you don't, this JavaScript will fail and the list won't change modes. So that's a introduction to the list reorder mode. Just a couple other things I want to show you real quick when we're in here, just little nuances that you have. We can add a class name to, it says specify class to apply the list row that is being dragged to its new target position. So if you'll notice, my list row doesn't really change, but I could add a class name in there so that it's in the drag mode. Maybe it changes it to a different color or adds a little icon to the front ends, things like that. And then also the drop spot is the gap in the list that indicates the position where the row you are dragging will be positioned. So let me go ahead and show you both of those situations right here. So notice we're already in the mode. So notice first is when I click on an item and start dragging it, right now it just is like I took a snapshot of that row. But I could change, for instance, the little icon to show, instead of the bars, I could show a little icon showing it's in mode. Now also notice that when I move it, it's showing an area here. In this case, it's just a blank spot, but you could change the CSS to say show like a drop zone, or something a little fancier, so they really get a visual indicator of where they're dragging. Right now, it just kind of puts in a little gap. There's like a little gap where I'm at to show where it's going to be dropped to. But if you want something more visible, you can go in to those settings and just add your own little classes to make those look a little fancier. And you just put the class name you want here in here. Now, this is another more advanced option. And this is the HTML that will be shown when the thing's being dragged. So let's go ahead and just copy this as an example and push it here. And I haven't tried this, so it could blow up on me big time. But I'm basically taking the HTML and it's showing this move to target, then drop. So this is an even fancier way. This just changes the look and feel of it, but this makes it even fancier. And what's cool is you can make that dynamic. So let's go ahead and go into working preview and let's see if I broke it. No, be fun. Okay. It's saying unidentified. So let's go look at that real quick. And I won't spend too much time on it because I don't want to waste, want to open it up for questions, be able to do that. But let's go ahead and go back into here and go to this and let's look at that. So we're doing a div style, color. I wonder if I have to do this, plus, and then, oh no, this is client side. So this is all client side. I don't see anything in there that's missing. It's not rendering this here. I wonder if I have to do a return HTML. You can replace the HTML as shown the road you're dragged by default. Yeah, I'll have to play with that a little bit more, but it doesn't like that for some reason. But what it would do is it would that drag, instead of just the snapshot of the row, you could put here, so you could add your own much better looking indicators, make it dynamic, have like a little GIF or something like that, or GIF showing there. A lot of fun stuff like that. So I'm gonna highlight out that because I obviously didn't get that to work, and we'll check it out and show you an example maybe next time just to close the loop on it. So that is the list reorder capability. Really straightforward to implement. It's a lot of fun, and there are a lot of situations where you want to go ahead and reorient things. And as you can see, it's very intuitive. People, when they see that, they'll immediately click and drag it, or they'll use their finger to start moving stuff back and forth. There's just no training required to show them what's going on there. But behind the scenes, you're given the ability to trap that activity, and you're also given, a very important, the ability to modify the look and feel of the process as it happens, so you'll be able to see there. So with that in mind, I'd like to go ahead and turn it back to Sarah and see if we have any questions regarding this functionality here, and any questions in general.
Okay, well, we did have one question, and I think you kind of addressed it when you spoke about making a callback
Oh yeah,
when the list was reordered. But the question was, will Alpha help update the row number for all the affected rows, or do you need to do that yourself to
you
reorder
have to
them?
do that yourself. So basically, let me go ahead and go into my demo from last week, just kind of give you a feel for it. Is like we had before, we have our list properties, we had our onMove function, and oh, this one doesn't have that. Almost, okay, let me find the one that does. I want to show you that. But yeah, you'll have to write the little Xbasic. Let's see if it's in here. I think I saved that. No, I didn't. I must have it in a different area. But basically, you have to call back in the Xbasic function, and then on the oh, okay, I do have it on here. Okay, sorry. I did it on this one. So I'll go in the Kanban, go to the list properties, go down here to the Kanban settings, go to my onMove function. Interesting, I have the Xbasic, but I don't have the code for doing, oh, you know why? It's in the pre-release. Oh, remember last week I was in my pre-release. This is my non-pre-release value. But in your Xbasic function right here, you're given all the list data, you're given the data for that row, and then you would just write a regular code. And so almost always I kind of, it's a pretty standard, so you would use just a SQL query to update the items in that column to reorder the sort order or whatever it happens to be, or you could write a little loop to go through and update the rows in that thing. Really, it's up to you on how you implement it from there, but you're going to have to write that code just because we don't know really what your database environment looks like, what are the columns, what are the unique IDs, all those kind of are primary keys, etc. But it's not bad. It's not bad at all. In terms of the kind of code. And once you've done it once, it's going to be the same over and over. So you can almost put that into an Xbasic class and use that for other projects and other things like that. Again, the reason I have my code here is that this is my, I don't have my pre-release. I'd have to actually launch my pre-release version, and I could show you there, but I want to keep it simple for today. So a little extra work, it's homework to do that, but we'll give you all the data to tell you what row it came from, what row it went to, and then you can write the little algorithm to go look up the data in the current database and then reset the sort orders.
All right. We do have a comment from another participant who says they just use the relative line numbering in the list when they have to save it back. So that might be
Oh,
something to
cool.
think
That's
about.
great. Yeah, that's
I,
really
I
handy.
yeah, I think with the calculated fields, I think you can use the list row number as a value for that when you set up your
Yeah,
list.
yeah. I'm sorry. Run that by me again.
I think in the list you can set up calculated fields and reference like the list row number to populate that data,
Yep.
which would then
And
be sent
also,
back.
well, and also if you just loop through them. So let me show you an example of that. Let me go ahead and show you an example. So what I did in my code is I cared about the from and to. But the reality is that if I want everything in the row, I can just go data is equal to get data, and I'm going to get rid of this 2 right here. So by the way, this list object get data, I'm going to go down here to insert UX component method, and I'm going to type get data. This is our online data, our online documentation. So you'll notice here that gets the value of all the controls in the form of a query string. Oh, that's dialog object. Here, this is what I want. List object get data. So it even shows you an example here of how you do that. So in here, it's get data and then the target. So it shows you in this case, what I'm doing is I'm getting a pointer to the control, which in this case, it's giving me that already. And then I'm getting the data, for example, this kind of pace. But I'm going to try an example here. I'm going to just do something interesting. I'm going to leave it without a target, and I'm going to stringify it and see if it explodes. Because then it may give me all the data on here. So let's go ahead and see this. Because then if I have all the data for all the rows, it's going to have the new. So I'm going to take Cecilia, move that up to first one, release it. Ah, false. No, you actually have to have data in there. But there is a function to get all the information of the data, and I wonder which one that is. Let's say go here, go back into my JavaScript. So I kind of have to use the from and to here.
I think it's just list.data.
Yeah, I think it's data. Let's go ahead and just do the list. Yeah, okay, there it is. There we go. Gotcha. So let's go ahead and copy this example. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to paste that. I'm going to get rid of some stuff. So I'm going to use this. So I'm going to say get the data in list reorder. So again, I'm pulling the get list data from list reorder. I'm just going to turn that into JSON. And then I'm going to get rid of this and I'm going to go here and say data JSON. So that looks right. Yep, list reorder. Data JSON is the data in there, okay? Great question, by the way. It's a really good enhancement because so you'll see it's giving me a JavaScript array of all the data. I know this is kind of doesn't really because it's an alert, but it's giving me, notice it's in the order, Kathy Morton, John Smith, Allison. So this is an array of JSON objects that's available of the new sort. Notice it's the new sort. What if I go here and drop it here? You'll notice now John Smith is the first person. So by default, I now know the order of these items. And if I have a primary key in each row of these, which I could as data, like when I get from SQL, you're going to have the primary key in there. You can just write a little loop saying go through each of these items and update the database with the zero-based row order to get the new sort order built into it from there. And as we mentioned before, when you're in here, and you are in the list properties, once we have gotten that information, this JSON stringified data, then I can use the trick I showed last week to call an Xbasic, send this JSON and then convert that into a pointer variable and loop through that variable to then do my database updates. So it's very straightforward. And in fact, you can get pretty fancy where instead of looping through and making individual query calls, you could actually build up a query on the fly saying, update all these rows and make it one single call to the database to update all those rows. Basically, it's a series of updates that will happen to a row. So there's some different tricks on how to do that there. But it was a great question. Sometimes you just want to update some information on a single row. In that case, you can use this method of just doing the get data for a single row. But if you want to get all of the JSON of the row, and this is applied here, but there's also things like that you can do in terms of adding rows and stuff like that. There are a lot of fun things you can do from here. But the trick was we used a built-in function called getListData. How I found out about that was insert the UX component method, and just looked up list control, and you saw we have different values here. And then there's sample code to show it. In fact, oh, check this out. Here, I'm going to copy this example real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and paste it down here. And let's go ahead and change this. So this shows you right here. That's a great way to show it to you. So now what we can do is, based on that data I got, I can create a URL parameter with that data JSON, and then this function right here calls the Xbasic callback, or function called XB, and gives it, and then this shows you right here, dim P as P, and then parse that incoming list data, and now you have a pointer variable that you can loop through, as I showed last week, to then go through each row in that list. So this is a very powerful, and again, thank you so much, whoever asked this. This is a really powerful sort of design pattern, because often you have a whole bunch of data in a list, and then you want to take that information and tell the server to do some stuff with it, say after you do some drags and stuff like that. So instead of making a callback every time you drag, you could have them drag and drop, and then have a button say save changes, and then you would pull the full list data and then run that update on the back end at one time. So there's different design patterns in terms of doing it every time they drag and drop, or having them drag and drop and then click a button to then say, okay, I've got my order right. Now I want you to go ahead and do the rest of the work there. Great question. Thank you.
All right. Assuming there are no further questions specific to your demo, I think that was it.
Yeah, I've got on the Kanban, I'll come back to it next time and do that there. I just don't have enough time to do it justice. This took a little longer
mm,
to put together, and I
there.
appreciate everybody's patience on that. There was a question that came in this week, and it regarded the Alpha application server. So I can address that now if you'd like.
Well, there are a few other
Oh,
questions. One
well,
was asking how to put the count summary data in the header for a Kanban.
that's
Let's.
exactly, that's what I'm going to cover. I'll have to cover.
Okay, we'll
It's
come
going to
back
take
to
a little
that.
longer than we have left on our wonderful.
All right. Well, with that, I've got three distinctly different questions.
Okay.
But
Well,
let's start
let's
with
get
this
our
one.
first person in, the person who sent the email, because we want to reward
Okay,
those people.
let's take the one. Yeah.
Basically, they were asking the questions. Right now, currently, the Alpha Anywhere application is a 32-bit application. And that's just driven architecturally by how it's built and other pieces there. So the question is the 64-bit capability to have 64-bit. And actually, hold on. I want to double check. Sorry there. I'm going to stop showing my screen for just one. I want to double check that question. I want to make sure that's exactly what it was.
Is Alpha Anywhere 64-bit on our roadmap question?
Yes, yes, it was there. It says, does Alpha have on their roadmap the 60-bit or 64-bit uh, platform? And it's still, but it's farther down the road. Basically, the demand hasn't been great in terms of people really requiring 64-bit applications. And at this point, Windows isn't requiring everything to be 64. Still on Windows 2016 server and stuff, it still runs 32. So it's on our radar, but it's not actively being really focused on, because there it just doesn't seem to be a near-term need. I think obviously down the road, if all of a sudden Windows says you can only have 64-bit, like interesting, I don't know if you've seen this week, but the Mac introduced a new operating system called Catalina, and they have now required 64-bit on their Catalina platform. So they're a little bit more aggressive at doing things along those lines. But Microsoft at this time says, yeah, you can keep using those 32 bits. There's just such an enormous amount of 32-bit apps out there that it would just break so many stuff, and a lot of companies have not updated their 32 bits just because they haven't seen a requirement for it. So at this time, it's on the roadmap, but it's not actively being built or worked on. But the team continually looks at the server aspects, and we're doing a lot of really cool stuff in terms of how to deploy Alpha and better make it easier to deploy and activate servers and do things like that. We're also doing a lot of work around Alpha Cloud to make Alpha Cloud even more solid, secure, and easier to set up and higher performance. So we're seeing those kind of aspects going there. But long story short, it's on the radar, it's on the roadmap. No super active right now, but we are keeping an eye on that because we want to make sure that we never leave our developers in a lurch if in case Microsoft starts saying, okay, next version of Windows Server, we're not going to provide any support for 32-bit. That could happen. We want to be prepared for that.
Okay. I think that answers the question. I know that internally we're just working really, really hard to get the product more efficient and better. So
Yeah, lower footprint. A key thing you want to we want to lower the memory footprint, mainly because the lower the memory footprint, then the more people, the more applications you can put on an individual server. So it increases dramatically the value of the product. So a lot of that under the cover stuff, you know, you won't see visible elements of it from the standpoint of in the user interface or elsewhere, but you'll see performance increases and you'll see better server utilization and higher optimization. And as we said, we're moving pretty quickly to be able to do things like use Node and JavaScript and Node.js JavaScript and Python, which will also expand a lot of capabilities on the server side, much more value that is available.
well, thank you for mailing in that question.
Yes, thank you. We
As
love those.
always, mail your questions to guides@alphasoftware.com, and we will definitely answer those um, at the next webinar. Were there any other questions that we want to address by email this week, or
Oh,
you
no, that was the only
want
one
to
I
do these
had
ones?
this week. So
Okay. All right. Well, then let's just go through these other questions we've had today.
sure, cool.
And I think this one might be easy enough to answer in the time that we've got left. And the question is, how do I build a list that has a master detail view? So they have a list of customers. They want to tap on a customer to drill down into the orders, and then tap on the orders and drill down into the items in that
Gotcha.
order.
So the cool thing is Alpha has built in the ability to do parent-child. So I'm going to go ahead and go to new control. I'm going to go UX. I'm going to create a new UX real quick. And I'm going to make this, I'm not going to make it mobile. I'm just going to make it pretty simple. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my quick panels and add panel to panel layout. There we go. And I'm just going to call this list parent child example UX. Okay. So I've got basically a very simple, panel card layout. You'll have on the left, as soon as it renders, some text, and on the right, some text. So nothing super fancy. So first thing I'm going to do is go here. And in panel card number 1, I'm going to add a list control. And I'll go list customers. And I'll go ahead and set that up here. So I'm going to make this SQL. Going to go to my connection string. Go to my customers. Have my field list here. I'll just make it simple, very, very easy there. No filtering or ordering, but I'm going to go here to list layout and I'm going to add these 3 items here. And I'm going to make that fill the container. So now I have my working preview with a parent-child list. Or, well, actually, sorry, just a parent. So you can see I've got my parent here. No list to, but it's done. It's called the database. It's loaded everything in here. So now what I want to do is I'm going to add a new list here. And this is panel card number 2. So I'm going to go ahead and add a list here. And I'm going to go list orders. And like I did before, I'm going to fill the container so it grabs the full container. Now I go in just like I did the parent. I'm going to go ahead and select my connection string. Going to select my table. In this case, it's orders. And I'll select my fields. And you notice I have an order ID right there. And I'm going to go, oh, you know what? Let me do one thing before that. Actually, let me come back and do that. Sorry. One thing I want to do in my list of customers, very important, is under the return value type, I want to make sure it says primary key. Oops, primary key. Because we need that primary key to do the foreign key relationship between the child and the adult, or the parent. So I'll go back to my list of orders here. We'll go SQL. Connection string, here we go. Table name, orders, field list. Add a few of these things here. That's good enough. The primary key here, and then I'm going to say it has a parent list. Okay, so this is the big difference. I'm going to say I have a parent list. And then it's going to ask me the parent list ID, which is list of customers. Notice it's giving my to list here. And I'm going to go ahead and preload the data. And I'm going to say my linking field in the parent list. So what is that primary key? And so these are the fields when I clicked on there in the parent. Then there's the linking field in this list, which is the child, and it's going to select customer ID because that's the parent-child foreign key relationship. So we built the list regularly with the orders, etc., did that, but I wanted to add a parent list and tell it had a parent-child relationship. I'm going to do the return file be the primary key because I may have a third list because you can chain these things together. So I'm going to now go to my list layout. Let's go ahead and add those. So I've got a nice little vol. Click OK. Save this. Now if I go to working preview, I might have to set the filter. And voila, parent-child list, done. Nothing I have to do. So as you can see, what I'm doing is as I click on a row, it's doing two things. Thing number one is that it's saying, okay, list here, filter yourself based on the primary key. And I specified what that primary key is, and I told it which column is the secondary key. Then the second thing it does is it says, oh, by the way, list number 2, child list, go ahead and refresh yourself. So as you notice, I didn't have to write any code at all. Boom, I just have these pieces here. And these lists, I could add a detail view. It's got all the sort, etc. I could add certain sort. I mean, everything you need to do from there. And you can see how fast it is. It's really simple there. Now, you'll notice the method I used here was the preload data. Okay, now very important, this is in consideration when you design your application. What this is going to do is, the important thing about this is preloading the data. So what you'll notice how fast it was because what it's doing is for that second list, it's going ahead and calling the database and downloading all the orders into that list. So when I run this, all the orders are already in that list. They're just not shown. And then when I click on an item, it does a filter and show of those items in the list. So that's what called preload data is. Now, if you don't want to use the preload functionality, another method you could do is create an argument and create a filter. And then when you hit the parent-child, it won't actually do a preload kind of scenario. It'll just refire and filter that list there. So it's really up to you on how you want to do it. The downside on the second way, which is the argument and the filter, is it's going to make a call back to the database to update that. So it's really an online application. But you may have a ton of information. There may be like millions of rows on that orders, and you really probably don't want to download all those to your app. And so you can really pick and choose the best method that's followed. But most of the time, people are building this kind of for offline. They have maybe 100 customers and 1,000 orders they want to download and have available. But the beauty of this is that there's absolutely zero coding necessary. You just set up the two lists. You set up the parent-child relationship by indicating what is the foreign key relationship, and Alpha does the rest for you. It's really fun, pretty easy, and pretty cool. And you can see, since it's already downloaded this, it's like insanely fast because it's really, all the data is already here. It's not making a call back to the server. So every time I click on one of these things, it does a refresh, and I don't have to show all the columns. Like for instance, this customer ID, I don't have to show that. I could hide that, but it's still in the data, so it's going to be filtered on accordingly. So I hope that gives you a pointer on how to do that. And with that, I'll pass it back to Sarah. I think we have maybe a follow-up on that, or we'll see. Lots of
Oh,
clicking
I'm
going
here.
on.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm just looking through the list here and spaced out for a moment there. Um, we have a couple of we do have a question asking about like how do you set up a class for Xbasic for querying SQL database. I think that's a bit more complicated
It is,
than
and it's a great
what we have
question,
time
and we're going to
for. We
cover
have
that.
1 minute.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
we'll put that on
And
our
then
list.
there was another one for asking how to include a third-party service using JavaScript. Um,
If we
or
could
to
get some
include
more
a
detail, could you do
clear
us a
JavaScript
favor?
library. Yeah, if both of those individuals could send their question with a little more
Yes, to
detail into
guides.
guides at alphasoftware.com, that would be very helpful because we can look into addressing that next week. And then there was one more question asking if you could do what you just demonstrated with XML data.
So we use JSON. The way you would have to do that with XML data is there's two methods. Method number one is when I build a list control, um, I can use what's called static, or I'm sorry, custom here. And in that case, I can create an Xbasic function, and that Xbasic function could then read the XML and turn it into a format, because we need either carriage return line feed or JSON format. The other option is, and this is much more involved, it's a really cool option, but we have the ability to create what's called a custom data source. And in the custom data source, you have to write some Xbasic code. And basically, you can take that XML data and convert it automatically into something that looks like a database. So you can do it there. But this is much more involved. This we use, for instance, wrapping Salesforce and SharePoint and other things along those lines. But it's really powerful because it basically takes any data source and turns it into a connection string that looks like a database. But it's a bit more involved from there. Now, option number 3 is that if you have a whole bunch of XML data, there are third-party services that will translate those into databases for you automatically. So the question is the XML data in file format, or are they records in a database? You may want to take some kind of element of converting those in the database, so then you don't have to do anything inside of Alpha. Just a different strategy, because you may find that that's faster and easier to implement because there's a lot of third-party tools that will convert XML into JSON for you automatically. There's actually cool tools that will literally take an XML file, an XSD, and turn it into a data structure for you, like with the parent child and everything ready to go. So there's a lot of cool things on there. So I would definitely explore that first before spending a lot of time, but you can definitely pull in XML data and convert it into something that you can then do there. But you're gonna have to do that with JavaScript, or I'm sorry, you'll have to do that with Xbasic or use like a node library to do that. But there are a lot of really third-party services that do it that may even just make your life easier because it's just done. And then you just deal with it on a relational structural database in the database.
Yeah, and to kind of help answer this question, I did paste a link to the JSON to XML Xbasic function. We do have a number of functions for both working with XML and JSON data, and methods to convert between those two formats. So that is an option. I have used it before to get XML into a view box from a web service. So that works pretty
Yeah,
well.
it just, do you know that XML is kind of wonky? Yeah, JSON from XML. Yeah, that may be the way to go, is use this one right here. It's pretty cool. It's really neat. Basically, you have this XML and you just do the JSON from XML and out pops, voila. So pretty neat stuff. And that would probably be your first cut. Take a look at that. Depends on how much XML you have and what the deal is, but you could write your own little thing to kind of create your own parser kind of scenario. Pretty neat.
Yep. Well, we are now 3 minutes over time,
Oh my
so I
gosh,
think we need to wrap it up.
Sarah, not
My
controlling this. Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your spending the time to come out and work with us.
Yes, and for those of you who didn't get your questions answered today, please send them in to guides@alphasoftware.com. If you check our YouTube channel, today's video recording should be up there within the next few days. We've got a handle on that process now. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.